All right, we're there. Hello, everybody. Well, yeah, morning somewhere. Yeah. Welcome to this meeting of Carpinteria Birdwatchers, the meeting for February 2024. Hopefully the people in the Zoom meeting can hear me. Somebody in the Zoom, yeah, all right, thumbs up, excellent. Hopefully, hey Mary. Hopefully we in the room will be able to hear the people on Zoom. So if and when we get to a part where you on Zoom want to talk to the people in the room, feel free to unmute yourself. You're all muted by default, but you can unmute and talk, and hopefully we can hear you in the room. For those in the room, if you have questions or comments while we're going through the meeting, I'll repeat questions if they're brief for the people on Zoom. If you're going to talk for a longer time, which is great, I'd love to have interaction. I'm going to ask you to come on up here and talk in front of this computer, because this is the one that has a live mic for the people watching on Zoom. And we can hear fine in the room just talking, but the people on Zoom will miss what you say. So I'm trying to make the meeting work as both a in-person meeting and a Zoom meeting. Okay, so as I said, welcome to this meeting. Tonight's meeting will be on birds in flight, specifically. We've never done a meeting on this topic, so I'm excited to do it. Before we get started, just a few quick announcements. One is that this Saturday, we will have our monthly outing of Carpinteria Birdwatchers. We will be at the Carpinteria Bluffs. So we're meeting at the Baylord Avenue parking, which is sort of like the main parking area for going to the Bluffs. If you're not going to the Viola Fields, going just to the Bluffs, most of the time people park there. Anyway, look on a map. It's Baylord Avenue. There's a parking lot there. We'll meet there at 8 a.m. on Saturday. And the tentative plan is we will walk down to where the seal overlook is and look at the seals and look at any birds down there, and then slowly work our way back. So it should be a lot of fun. So there's that. And there's more information about this on the carpbirdwatchers.org website. So if you go there, you can look for the post that talks about the outing. And then a second announcement is, at the last meeting, we talked about this issue of the big sycamore on Santa Monica Creek. And I made a big point of telling everybody, oh, there's going to be a meeting. And I even got the date wrong. I said it was on February 14th. But actually, the flyer next to the tree, this is about a tree that has been proposed to be replaced, like cut down and replaced. The flyer said February 15th, which is today at 5:30, but there was no meeting today. And on the city's website, it says the next meeting of the tree board is next week, but it also says that meeting has been canceled due to a lack of agenda items. So I'm trying to get in touch with the people at the city who know about this and find out, does this mean the tree, has a reprieve? If there's nothing to meet about, is that because the tree is not going to be cut down? I'm cautiously optimistic that's what that means. There was some trimming of the tree about a week ago. They went out and they took off some of the broken limbs that had fallen down in the high winds, and it actually looks really good now. They've cut, just looks like a great tree. So fingers crossed that tree will be there the rest of my life, the rest of Brody's life. we could see that tree, for many, many years. By the way, for you in the room, there is a camera on the room. So this computer over here by the snacks, which I should mention there are treats, you are visible in the Zoom meeting. So, if you were going to do anything you didn't want to have visible in the Zoom meeting, you have to go back and sit where Tom and Laurel are. They took the seats that were not on camera. Who would have thought they would do that? And let's see. So we talked about the tree. We talked about the outing. Oh, and then the last announcement this weekend is the Great Backyard Bird Count, which is a thing that a bunch of organizations organize to encourage people to go out and look at birds. Probably most of the people in here don't need any extra encouragement to go out and look at birds. But if you were thinking about maybe using eBird or maybe using the Merlin app to actually submit your sightings, that's what they're really pushing for this week. They want to get lots and lots of data. They want people who are maybe more casual users who are not contributing data to eBird, go out and put your checklist in eBird. It's fun and it's not that hard. Or just use the Merlin app. You can submit your sightings that way. Anyway, so we will be participating as a group on Saturday when we go to the Bluffs. We will put in an eBird checklist. I'll probably get Laurel to keep the checklist so I can just have fun looking at the birds. So let's see. Any questions about any of that? Any feedback on anything that people want to share, either in the room or on Zoom? Lucia looks like you want to talk. Or Pat, sorry, Pat. Lucia's in the meeting, but it's not, does not want to talk. Okay. All right, well, then I'll just jump right into the meeting topic. I'll probably put a break in the middle. So if you start to get antsy or hungry in the room, again, there are treats, just, you know, get up and walk over and I'll say, oh yeah, it's time for the break. But otherwise, I'll just do my best to remember. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. We have a new, bigger monitor in the room, which is very fun. But unfortunately, you folks on Zoom can't see it. Well, it's exciting for those in the room. Okay, so can I hide my meeting controls? I would like to. Hide loading meeting controls. Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm going to talk about birds in flight. And it's kind of, at first glance, maybe an odd topic. You know, why would you talk about birds in flight? Why talk about birds in pine trees? Talk about, you know, birds on my street. I mean, it's a very specific niche topic, but it turns out, no, it's actually a very important topic. So as a birder, it took me a long time to really come to appreciate the importance of looking at birds in flight. I mean, sometimes it's just cool, like, you know, a flock of these northern pintails is flying by. Yeah, you're going to look at them, right? That's exciting. But this article actually talks in a little more detail about how can I make this meeting control not be in the way? I think I'm just going to shove it over there. That's the best I can do. This is an article in Birding Magazine from 2004 by Christopher Wood, and I linked to it in the page at Carpinteria Birdwatchers for this meeting, so you can go follow the link and read the whole article, which I would encourage you to do. I thought it was really good. But one of the things that he talks about in his introduction is that, you know, we're used to looking at things like birds of prey when they're flying. Like, we're sort of used to the idea that, oh, that's when I'm going to see them, so I'm going to check them out. I'm going to get my binoculars on that bird in the sky and really look at it. But for some other birds, like especially like perching birds, little, you know, brown jobs in the bushes and things like that, we're less inclined to do that. Like, we'll look at it when it's perched, and then it will fly, and we'll watch where it goes and see if we can look at it again wherever it lands, or if it just keeps going, we'll go back to looking for another stationary bird that we can look at. And the point that he makes in this article, and that I'm making in talking about this, is that no, you really should look at those birds when they're flying, even those little brown jobs. You can actually learn a lot by watching a bird as it flies. It turns out pretty much every species of bird has its own flight style, and a lot of them are very distinct. So you can really, if you're trying to identify a bird, even a bird you can't see well, if you can see it well enough to see how it's flying, which you can usually see. I mean, a bird has to be very far away for you not to be able to see at least how it's flying. That can be really useful for identifying it. You can really narrow things down. So it's worth looking at birds. And you know, looking at them naked eye is good and certainly easier. But if you can actually get binoculars on them as they're flying, you can see a lot more detail, just like looking at them when they're perched with binoculars. You know, you're in effect much closer. You know, you get a much better view of the bird, and you can actually see a lot of the characteristic features of the bird, even when it's in flight, if you can get your binoculars on it and give it a good look. So, so I encourage you to check out this article. One other thing I will talk about with this article, hide these controls again. Okay. And he kind of has this illustration here to show it, which is the effect of lighting conditions. So those two pictures there are both ring-billed gulls. You know, I'm going to go ahead and minimize this so you can see it better. Those two birds basically look the same. I mean, I'm not sure they're the same individual, but they're both adult ring-billed gulls. They look very similar, but they look very different in these two photos. And the reason they look so different is that the top photo is a ring-billed gull photographed against a bright sky. So the bird looks relatively dark because it's, you know, against that bright background. And then the bottom one is a bird that's lit well with a dark storm cloud behind it. So it looks much brighter, it looks much paler, much whiter. And so it's important to keep that in mind when you're looking at birds in flight, especially, you know, if they're kind of far away or you're not seeing a lot of details and you're trying to identify the bird. Be aware of that you can trick yourself. You know, lighting conditions are very important. to take into account. And as you gain experience looking at birds, you're doing this already. I'm sure everybody in this meeting who's been out birding, you start to do that automatically anyway. But it can actually be worth thinking about it. Like in a situation like this, you're trying to say, well, how pale or dark is that gull? Well, the gull didn't change its paleness between those two photos, but the appearance changed a great deal. So it's worth thinking about. So I thought that was just one of the things it talks about in this article. And there's a bunch more, but I'm going to keep going. So for the rest of this talk, I'm basically just going to go through the field guide. I'm going to go in taxonomic order, and I've got a bunch of slides of birds in flight, and I'm going to start with the waterfowl, and I'm going to end with the sparrows, and just kind of talk about different little fun facts, different things to notice looking at these birds in flight. It's not a thorough coverage of the topic. It's just what was interesting to me as I was throwing this together. So if you have observations or feedback, or if it sparks an idea that you have of something that's related, definitely feel free to chime in. That's true for you on Zoom as well. I encourage you to give feedback. Anyway, so these birds. This is actually a really good time of year to get familiar with the look of these birds in flight, because we're going to start seeing them. Next month, March, is basically when you get to see these birds in Carpinteria. They breed in the far north, they winter in the far south. You can usually find a few of them throughout the year if you check the eBird reports and are willing to chase them down. But if you want to see a lot of them, March is really the time. And what these are is brants. These are they're like a big duck or a small goose. I think technically they're a small goose, but they're sort of, they're small for a goose, but they're big for a duck. And they're all dark. They're fairly black overall. They have a little bit of white around the tail, and you can't really even see it very well in this image because, again, they're backlit, right? There's a bright background, and the brants are kind of shadowed, but they have a white ring around their neck, which if they're close enough to you, you can totally see. But a lot of times you're not going to see them that close, right? You're going to see a flock of them flying by over the ocean, because that's what they do when they migrate. You get these big flocks of them just heading up the coast. They fly over the ocean, and because you think about how the Southern California coastline kind of curves around, they're flying north and they run into it around Carpinteria. They run into they turn and they follow the coast out over the water. So you look out there and you will see these big flocks of these dark ducks, geese flying by. And they're very likely brant. And if you get used to what they look like and their flight characteristics and their flocking characteristics, you can totally recognize them going by out there. And it's very exciting. At the right time, if you're lucky, you can see hundreds of them going by in just a few minutes. I mean, big flocks. So it's very fun. So I encourage you to look for brants. It's very exciting. You could confuse them with scoters. Surf scoters are also doing basically the same thing. So it's kind of a fun comparison. Scoters are a little smaller. I think they tend to fly a little lower. Brants tend to fly a little higher. I don't know, when they're doing their migration thing. Anyway, go look for them. Check them out. So moving ahead through the field guide, we're going to move pretty fast. Pigeons and doves. And, I went ahead and made links on the slide. So you can do this pretty easily if you want. I'm going to skip it for the purposes of this meeting because I want to just keep moving, keep the pace up. But each of those 4 different species listed there is a link. And if you click on it, it takes you to a page at eBird for that species that shows you all the photos that have been uploaded to eBird for that species, sorted in rating order, so the highest rated photos first, and filtered to only show the ones that have been tagged flying. So you can go and you can look at hundreds and hundreds of photos of a mourning dove flying, and a few of a mourning dove perched, because it turns out eBird users aren't that rigorous about their tagging, but that's okay. But I just included some photos of them here, not flying for the most part, because I don't happen to have good photos of them flying myself. But just to kind of give you a comparison of sort of the overall shape of these birds, all 4 of these species are kind of roughly similar. They're like medium to big pigeons or doves, and they fly kind of similarly to each other, and they look kind of similar. But if you start, checking them out, you can totally tell them apart. Some are easier than others. The mourning dove in the upper left-hand corner there, very long, tapered, shape, that long pointed tail, and very slim overall. The Eurasian collared dove, the next one as you go clockwise around the page. It's not a great photo for showing you the shape of the body because its wings are drooping. It makes it look even bigger than it is, but it is bigger than a mourning dove. It is a little chunkier, its body is more substantial. Its tail kind of is squared off at the end, unlike the pointed tail of the mourning dove. And you can often see that in flight pretty well. That's a good way of distinguishing them. The next one, that group of pigeons in the top of that pine, are band-tailed pigeons, and they are bigger still. They are beefy. They look like, I guess because of the Super Bowl, I'm thinking they look like linebackers, right? They're tough birds. They're big, and they fly really powerfully. They sometimes fly in big flocks. If you're in the right habitat where they hang around, you'll see a big flock of them flying. It's definitely worth checking them out in flight and getting an idea of what they look like. Again, it's just big, robust, powerful birds in flight. And then rock pigeons or rock doves down in the corner there. Kind of similar to the band-tailed pigeon in the sense of being pretty powerful flyers and being a little beefier than, say, the mourning dove or the Eurasian collared dove, but less so than the band-tailed pigeons. I mean, this photo doesn't really show you the size comparison very well, but they're a little smaller than band-tailed pigeons, sort of shorter body plan. You can get lots of experience seeing rock pigeons. Just go to your local fast food restaurant and hang out in the parking lot. They're like all over. But check them out in flight. And again, you can learn to recognize the differences between these different species pretty easily. It takes time to get the familiarity, but then once you have it, it's pretty easy to recognize these different species as they're flying. I do have a tough time sometimes mourning doves, Eurasian collared doves. Depending on the angle and how they look, I can be like, is that, is that one, is that the other? So get your binoculars on them and see what you think. You can't always identify every bird. It's the nature of birding, right? Sometimes you got to just let it go. All right, so we're going to let these go and keep moving. Whoops, no, we're going to go back. So one more dove, just because it's fun. You can't really get a sense of scale in this still photo, but this is a tiny little pigeon, dove, rather. It is the common ground dove, right, Brody? And so if you see a little tiny dove in flight around here, that's probably what it is. And they have a characteristic dove flight style, they just, if you look at a lot of these, you come to recognize, oh, it's flying like a dove. It just sort of has that wing beat cadence, direct flight kind of thing that they do. But it's tiny, it's very small. And, it can be hard to tell size on a distant bird, right? It's very easy to confuse yourself or trick yourself. Because, again, your brain is doing this subconsciously. It's looking at something in the distance and it's trying to sort of subconsciously gauge how far away is it, and if you see objects next to it of known size, that'll give you a ruler that'll let you, kind of make this judgment of how big or how small it is. But a bird by itself in the sky doesn't really give you much of a ruler. So you're kind of left without a lot of clues. But if you're watching the bird in flight, it turns out physics really helps you out because a bigger bird flaps slower in general. Like little birds flap faster, big birds flap slower. It's just like inherent in the physics of flight, how you flap your wings. And if you watch these common ground doves flying, you can kind of just immediately sense like, oh, that's a little dove because it flaps really fast and it's a little compact thing with a little short tail. And if you see the reddish primary feathers, that's also a real giveaway. And we have them in carp. They're hard to find. They like avocado orchards. They don't go out and hang out in public a lot. They're kind of shy and retiring. I have seen them in carp maybe 5 times, 6 times in at least that many years of pretty, avidly birding around carp. So if you see one, it's a really special thing, but they are out there. They're definitely out there. So again, speaking of things that you see only rarely in flight, this was a bird I saw at the Carpinteria Salt Marsh last, I think, September. And it just flushed off the ground in front of me and flew away. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got my camera on, was very happy to get any photo at all. This is the best photo I got of this bird. But this is a lesser nighthawk. This is one of the nightjars. It's a bird that comes out at night and flies around catching insects on the wing. It has this really cool kind of flight, this very kind of graceful, buoyant, sort of acrobatic kind of flight. And you almost never see them around here. But this was probably, post-breeding dispersal, some juvenile bird that was just out and about. Happened to land at the Carpinteria Salt Marsh and fly away from me. So that was fun to see. Okay, well, another bird that you're going to see in flight almost exclusively is a swift. Yeah, this is a Vox's swift, which for many years I called a Vaux swift because it looks like that's how you would pronounce it. It's VAUX''S. I have been told it is Vox's by people who sounded more sure of themselves than people who told me it was Vaux. It's probably one or the other, but I'm going with Vox's. Anyway, swifts, as the name implies, are fast. They are built for high-speed flight. That is what they do. That is all they do. They just fly really fast, almost all the time. You're very rarely going to see a swift that's not flying. They will descend into chimneys or roost in hollow trees or roost in various places. But then they will be up and flying again. Typically, you're only going to see them that way. And they have a sort of characteristic flight style. So if you think about a bird's wing, and I hope I get this right. So if you think about the bone structure of the human forelimb, right? If I were a bird, this, is it the wrist? Yeah, okay. So the bird's elbow is like tight into its body. Somebody correct me if I start just talking piffle. Okay, good. Thank you, Brody. And then that prominent bend in the wing is basically the equivalent of a mammalian wrist, right? So the outer part of the wing, past that bend, is like the hand, right? You can think of it that way. Swifts are almost all hand, right? The bend in their wing is really close to their body. And it's just this airfoil built for speed, right? So when a swift is flying, it's not the kind of usual bird thing you see where it's like bending and flapping and bending and flapping and bending and flapping. It's like, it's just hand. It's just this thing waggling really fast. And they zip, they travel super fast. And it's this, you can learn to recognize that flight. And they'll be hanging around, they're catching insects on the wing. A lot of times you'll see them, mixed in with swallows. And if you look carefully at a mixed flock of swallows and swifts, you can come to recognize the difference in how the swifts are flying. Like they're similar, but they're different. And they're different because of this anatomical feature of swifts. Like I have a hard time describing it, but I know it when I see it. And you too can know it when you see it. So it's definitely worth checking out swifts in flight. Okay, shorebirds. We're on to shorebirds. So shorebirds are a group that I tended to ignore in flight for a lot of my birding career. It's like they were hard enough to tell apart, like I'm going to wait for them to land and I'm going to study them, like what does it look like? What does it speak? What is it, all kind of. It turns out, no, you can actually see a lot of the features that you need to confidently identify them while they're flying by. You just got to commit. You got to commit to looking at the bird in flight. So here is a local shorebird that we have. It's one of the big ones, which again would be reflected in its flight style if you are paying attention. It's got a lot of these buffy tones, these cinnamon tones, right, which is a very helpful clue. It's got a big, long, down-curved beak. This one, its beak kind of looks short for this species. Maybe that's just the way it's angling, or maybe it's a relatively young bird. I'm not sure. But this is, in fact, a long-billed curlew. And the buffy wing linings, this very colorful cinnamon color here and the underside of the wing is a good thing to look for. If you see that, you can be thinking, there's one other possibility that we'll look at in a second, but you can generally, if it's got the big, long, down-curved beak, think long-billed curlew. The other big curlew-ish bird, it's a little smaller, is this one, which is a whimbrel, right? And if you can see it this well, like you can see the really boldly striped crown, which is a good, is kind of a dead giveaway. The long-billed curlew has some striping, but not that bold. But where's the cinnamon, right? It doesn't have those cinnamon tones on the wings. And it's totally obvious in flight. So if you get a good look at it, if the light is good, you can say, oh yeah, it looks like a curlew-ish bird, but it's got no cinnamon color. It's probably around here, a whimbrel. And a lot of these things I'm saying, oh, this will tell you it's this will tell you it's this. They all have the asterisk that, yeah, around here, right? There are other species, many other species that could be confused with these ones I'm showing you that we don't usually see around here. I'm just talking about common local birds. Okay, another common local shorebird, handily equipped with, brilliantly obvious, field mark that's visible in flight. This is a willet, and it's got those black and white stripes in the outer part of the wing. Again, there are other shorebirds that have that, but not so much around here. All right, so if you see a, sort of medium to big grayish shorebird with those things in the wings around here, it's a willet. I mean, but give it a look, make sure it's got the right beak. Shorebirds, the beak is super important. Okay, another one with sort of the cinnamon, not quite as cinnamony as the long-billed curlew, but this is a marbled godwit, which is pretty big. Like it's up there close to the size of a long-billed curlew. So you want to get your binoculars on there and look for the curve of the beak, right? Because the marbled godwit beak goes up. And it's recurved, it's not decurved. Is that the right term? Yeah. Curves up, with split point. So this is a fun one. We have a fair number of them around here. I would look at that bird in flight and be like, it's a sandpiper-ish bird. I don't know. The thing that I recognize this bird by really quickly when it's wading around, feeding on the mud flats or whatever, or on the beach, is it has very prominent, brightly colored yellow legs. There's a handy mnemonic device there because it is, in fact, called a yellow legs. This is a greater yellow legs. And when it's in flight, you don't really see the legs that well. But again, go by the body shape. It's long and tapered and kind of thin, especially for the shorebirds we have around here. It kind of stands out that way. The shape and length of the beak. It's vocalizing. You learn its call. That can be very helpful. I'm not really talking about, birding by ear is part of this, but that's part of this, definitely. Right. When you're looking at a bird in flight, you're not getting that great extended view up close on the ground where you can really study the bird. You're just getting a few clues really quickly. And if it's making a sound, you definitely want to pay attention to that because it will help. But this is a greater yellow legs in flight. Peeps, so little sandpipers, right? Again, for most of my bird watching career, if there was a group of little actually still today, if there's a group of little sandpipers flying by, I'm very inclined to just make a rough estimate of how many there are and put peep species in my checklist because I can't tell them apart. It's hard to tell them apart. But again, get binoculars on them and you can see enough. These, in fact, are Western sandpipers, and they're in their breeding plumage, so they have that little bit of a pattern on the head that's visible, at least in this bird, pretty well. But it's got those kind of rusty tones on the crown, and then more rusty stuff in the auriculars and a little white line in between. See the legs, it's got the dark legs to separate it from the least sandpipers around here, which have yellowish legs. Anyway, but it's perfectly fine to say peep spot. It's a peep spot. It's a Western sandpiper. And if you get, look at it in flight, you've got a chance to identify it. You don't have to wait for it to land. A local shorebird that's actually in some ways kind of helpful to see in flight is this black-bellied plover. Right? It does not have a black belly. So the mnemonic device just leaves you hanging there. It has a black belly in its breeding plumage, but this is its wintering plumage. It's basic plumage, right? It's not confusing enough to have to remember all these birding terms. You have to remember multiple sets of birding terms. So there's breeding plumage versus winter plumage. Or, if you prefer, there is alternate plumage, which is breeding plumage, versus basic plumage, which is winter plumage. Technically, I guess alternate basic is more precise because it's not necessarily breeding all the time when it's in breeding plumage. It's not necessarily winter all the time when it's in winter plumage. you can call it whatever you want. Anyway, this is what it looks like when it's not in its breeding / alternate plumage. And when it flies, it has these black axillars, these black wing pits, sort of. And it's helpful if you're looking for closely related species, the Pacific golden plover, or maybe even the American golden plover. Haven't helped you telling the two of them apart, however, between the two golden plovers. No, they're similar. But they don't have the black wing pits. So if you heard there's a report, there's a Pacific golden plover on the beach with all the black-bellied plovers, and the flock flies by, look for the one that doesn't have the black wing pits and follow that bird, and hopefully it will land, and then you can study it because you really want to see the details carefully. But that is a black-bellied plover with the black wing pits. Yeah. So the question from Sally is, when that one is flying away from you, can you really see the white rump on the tail? I want to say yeah-ish, but I don't actually know. Yeah, that's why I'm saying yes, because I'm looking at this photo. I apologize for not being expert enough to just answer that confidently off the cuff, but I don't want to misinform. Consult your field guide and believe Mr. Sibley or Mr. Dunn or whoever who wrote your field guide. Don't believe me, because I don't actually know. Have they? Excellent. Okay, well, now I've been exposed as a fraud. Let's keep moving quickly so you forget. And I just threw these in because I think they're cute. These are snowy plovers. I'll give you a fun preview. So I'm fortunate enough that Chuck Graham is doing a profile on carp birdwatchers and emailed me with a bunch of questions about my history with birding and Carpinteria Birdwatchers. It's going to be in Carpinteria magazine, hopefully an upcoming issue. But one of the things he asked me was, what is your favorite bird? And I thought about it, I was like, well, they're all my favorite birds. It's whatever bird I'm looking at. But I ended up deciding that no, snowy plovers are my favorite bird. And a specific snowy plover is my favorite bird. So check out that issue of the magazine, and hopefully it's included in the article, and you can find out what my actual individual favorite bird is. Okay, gulls. You can't have a talk that covers the whole field guide without at least a little bit of gulls, right? Because I love the gulls, and I would never have thought I would ever say that for a long time. But no, it's true. I think they're awesome. So gulls in flight are definitely a group that I did not bother to identify the species for at least 80+% of my history as a bird watcher. It was a gull. I knew that. It was flying, right? It was a gull species. Period. The end. Why would you look anymore? Because you couldn't possibly tell a gull apart. You have to study gulls for hours in order to tell them apart. But no, it turns out that's not correct. And once I started looking at gulls in flight, I realized that no, you actually can often tell them apart. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. We're just going to go quickly through the big four, as I like to call them, the four common gull species we see around here, and then a few others because I can't help myself. And I'm just going to look at adults, and then I'll look at the immature gulls too. But so you see this gull flying over in Carpinteria. It's a big gull. It's an adult, which is helpful. It's got a lot of black visible on the underside of the wings, right? And that turns out to be a fairly accurate reflection of what it would look like if you could see the tops of its wings, right? So with gulls, of course, with these big white-headed gray-backed gulls, the precise shade of gray of the back and the wing coverts, this one called mantle shade, is hugely important for ID, right? Little fine distinctions in how dark or light that gray is can make a big difference in your ID. Well, this is the darkest backed gull that we have around here. This is in fact an adult Western gull, which is probably the gull we have the most of around here. And we have them all year round, and they breed locally, so you see a ton of them. And when you look at them on the underneath, on the adults, you can see those dark flight feathers, even from below. So it's very useful. This too is a Western gull. So it's coming straight at you, so you don't get that good view, but you can kind of see enough of the dark mantle or the dark, tops of the wings. You can kind of see enough of the beak. Again, if you get the binoculars on that bird as it flies by, you can get a pretty good look at that beak. And again, beak size and shape and pattern, color pattern is really important for gull ID. It's not a gull talk. We're not going to spend a lot of time, but that's a Western gull. Here's in some cases, the next most common bird we have, next most common gull we have around here, is a California gull in its winter plumage, its basic plumage. So it's got this kind of, well, it doesn't matter. We're not going to go through all the details, but you can see the beak shape. You can see the beak pattern. It's got this long parallel-sided beak. The gray of the upper wing is certainly a lot lighter than a Western gull. And if you look at the underside of the wing, that's a lot lighter than a Western gull, right? You don't have those dark flight feathers showing through all the way through here. And has a dark eye, which is going to be helpful to distinguish it from an adult ring-billed gull. So we're just going to keep going. An adult ring-billed gull. So pretty similar to the California gull. Slightly shorter beak, different beak pattern, the yellow beak with that prominent black ring, light iris. Okay, the California gull had a dark iris. You can't always tell what color the eye is when a bird is flying like what you know. But if it gets close enough and you get the binoculars on and the lighting is good, you can get an idea. If you do see that pale iris, it's not a California gull. The extent of the smudging on the head and nape is less than on the California gull. Okay, we're just going to keep going. So I always feel happy when I see a Heermann's gull because I can relax. It's like, oh, it's a Heermann's gull. It's all dark. It looks totally different. So there's an adult, actually, yeah, adult-ish Heermann's gull. It's not in its breeding plumage, alternate plumage. But Heermann's gull, that orange beak, dark below. Oops, I think that was the next bird. Yeah. Okay. All right. So now we'll look at some younger birds. This is an immature ring-billed gull. There's a pretty strong pattern on its wings, like a lot of contrast going on. Big contrasting dark band on the tail. The beak shape is kind of very useful. I could talk, because I know I have in the past, for 20 minutes about the shape of a ring-billed gull's beak. So we're not going to do that today. We're going to keep going. Yeah, what the heck is this? This is another ring-billed gull. Again, not an adult, maybe a little older than that last one. You kind of see that characteristic shape. It's useful. Sort of maybe starting to get a light eye. I'm not sure. I think its eye is still pretty dark. But the beak is what I'm mainly relying on, calling this a ring-billed gull. And a lot of contrast on the upper wing. And even some on the lower wing, you can see it's pretty contrasty. It's working its way. It's a teenager. It's almost an adult. Okay, so here's a first-year California gull. So we see a lot of these. We're just going to keep going. But you can see the beak. It's not with its head angled. You can't quite see how long it is, but it's got that dipped in ink look of an immature California gull. All right, here's a cool shot of an immature Western gull. Yeah, it's got that big, heavy Western gull beak with a pronounced swelling at the gonus. Right, the tip is big and swollen with a little prominent thingy down here. You can see a little bit of the adult mantle feathers coming in. So you can see it's a relatively dark shade of gray, really pink legs, Western gull. Go down to the beach. You can see 100 of them. You could like check them out at every possible age. I wouldn't lie to you. It's actually really interesting. It's really fascinating to sit there with a whole bunch of gulls and just sort through them. So here is another species, not one of the big four. Anyone want to make a guess what species this is? What's that? It was formerly known as the mew gull. So yeah, it is in a very real sense a mew gull. But these days it is actually called the short-billed gull. They split it. Yeah. Yeah. So it was previously mew gull, and then they decided, no, the European population is a different species than the North American population. So the European population was renamed the common gull, and the one around here was renamed the short-billed gull, which is what this is. A little tiny beak, Compared to, so this is actually an interesting bird. So this, I mean, this individual bird, I was out birding with a couple of really good birders, people who I look up to and think, oh, I'm not going to say their names because they got this bird wrong. But really good birders that I defer to just by default, right? Because these guys have done it a lot longer than I have. And this bird went flying by, and we weren't looking for gulls. We were looking for that that merlet, that ancient merlet. We had a couple of ancient merlets on the Christmas count, and one of them was up by Loon Point. So we were up there looking for that bird. And this gull flew by, and they were stuck on their scopes there. So, but I checked out this gull going by, and I can't help, trying to gather opinions from these experts. If they're silly enough to be birding next to me, I'm going to pepper them with questions. So I said, what do you guys think that gull was? And they kind of looked at me. I didn't really look at it. So I showed them the picture on the back of my camera, the tiny little LCD screen of this photo. So, well, what do you think it is? And they was a ring-billed gull. And I was like, I thought it was a short-billed gull. I'm like, okay, maybe, I don't know. They didn't care. But then later I got the photo and I uploaded it and I asked everybody, and I eventually got an expert consensus that, yeah, this was a short-billed gull. Little tiny beak, little too small for a ring-billed gull, and the lack of contrast, like the relatively muted pattern on the upper wing, are the things that convinced folks. So on we go. So this is a cool bird. This is not a bird that I see every day, and I still get excited every time I see it, even though there's a certain number of them around in the winter months. This is, in fact, a first-year herring gull. And one of the cool things that kind of distinguishes first-year herring gulls is this light patch on the inner primaries. It's got this sort of light patch on its inner primaries. And there are some other gulls that have similar versions of that, but with first-year herring gulls, it's fairly prominent. So this was. And again, you can really only see that in flight. So it's kind of a handy thing if you're trying to decide if this, first-year gull you're looking at, which is always, fraught, like first-year gull, whew, take a deep breath. Okay, what do we got here? And if it flies and it has that, it helps make the ID that, oh yeah, herring gull. And one more local gull that we have around here, another first-year bird, very uniform upper wing, and kind of, and the wing tips are basically the same shade as the rest of the wing, and you can kind of see it, especially on the upper wing. Like most of these first-year gulls that are relatively light, the primaries are going to be darker. Like they may not be super dark depending on the species, but they're going to be darker than the rest of the wing. And with this one, it's pretty much just one shade all the way out. All dark beak, fairly heavy, kind of almost westerny, like a western gull in terms of the heaviness and the swollen gullness. This is a glaucous-winged gull, first-year glaucous-winged gull.
Do they not have a black wing actually in the wing?
Yeah, so when they're even in their adult, like, yeah, the tip of the primary is basically the same shade as the rest of the wing, right? And they're that way in the first-year bird too. Yeah, relatively little contrast in terms of the, like, you see a gull with a folded wing, you're used to thinking like the tip of the primaries are going to be black, right? And the rest is going to be the mantle shade. And with glaucous winged gulls, they're like, nope, we're all just this color. Okay, we're done with gulls. I'll take a big sigh of relief. We're done with gulls. Until next time. This is a tern. And it's got that cool little, again, non-breeding plumage, winter plumage. Non-breeding winter, basic plumage. Right? There's 3 different systems. I was saying there's only 2. There's 3. Anyway, it's got that non-breeding plumage thing of the sort of the black patch on the side of the head. It's like a little black patch that's surrounded by lighter feathers. All dark beak, relatively long tail, kind of a smaller tern, not super small, but smaller than the ones we usually see. Who wants to identify this bird? I know several of you know what this bird is. Take a risk. Identify the bird. What's the worst that could happen? Forrester's tern. Thank you, Laurel. No, it's kind of Laurel to be brave. Here's another tern. Big one. This is a big tern. This is our biggest tern-like tern that we see around. Big, heavy red beak with sort of a dark tip. Like if you see it this close and this well, it's easy, right? You will often see it farther away, and it's not as easy. This is a Caspian tern. But again, get your binoculars on it, get a good look at that beak. With these terns, the beak is really important, and you're not going to be able to see it without getting your binoculars on the bird, probably, unless it's really close. All right, another local tern, another biggish one. Anyone? Royal tern. So, relatively heavy beak, orange beak. The extent of black on the crown, on the nape rather, how far back the white on the crown goes in this non-breeding plumage is really helpful for distinguishing it from this next bird, which is the elegant tern. So its beak is longer and slimmer, and its wings are longer and slimmer. It's more elegant, right? I know this is a silly thing, but I see it in terms of male pattern baldness. The extent of the white on the front of the bird's crown in the winter plumage, I have the hardest time telling the difference between elegant and royal until I started thinking of it as, oh, if it's a balding human, like they're going to really care about the difference between this and this. Like this, they've still got a little bit of, it's like the transition is sort of above the eyes, right? But on this one, it's like, no, we're done. It's like way back there. But then in the breeding plumage, they get all dark all over and they all look very snazzy and they put on their toupees, I guess. Anyway. And the beak shape, narrow, thin beak, really, really helpful. We have very few elegant terns around here right now. They're more of a summertime species. The opinion of some of the local eBird reviewers is that we definitely have 0 of them around right now. So if you are a birder out there and you're going to report an elegant tern, they're going to really want to see a photo. Just letting you know. I mean, you can totally see one, and it'd be cool if you did, because I'd like to see them be wrong, but get a photo, definitely get a photo. And they'll be back soon, and we'll have lots of them. One more shot of one of the same terns you've already seen. This one's got its snazzy breeding plumage, so no baldness at all. This is, in fact, another elegant tern. I just like the photo with a bunch of gulls down there. See, if I were being mean, we'd have to spend 10 minutes on what are these gulls down there. Not even going to bother, just going to move right on. See, look at the self-control I'm exhibiting. We'll talk about cormorants. So we have 3 species of cormorants here. We have all 3. And they all look the same. They all look like cormorants. So this is the one we probably have the most of, at least right around here, right? It's got the biggest, thickest neck. It's like the tough guy cormorant. It's the one that goes inland a lot. Like if you're inland, this is the one you're seeing probably. It's got the orange on its gular patch, its little bare skin up there on the head, but it also has orange up here, like between the eyes and the beak, the lores, right? It's got fairly extensive orange going on its face. This is the double-crested cormorant. It's got that prominent kink in its neck. When you see it flying, it's actually really helpful to see these flying because they adopt this characteristic pose when they're flying, and with the double-crested, it's got a kink in its neck. I mean, the others have sort of a kink, but they're not as kinky as this bird. I didn't mean to sound that. Okay, so almost as big as the double-crested cormorant, fairly thick neck, but look at the pattern around the face. And again, you got to be fairly close to see that. You got to have a good look with good light, not too far away. But you can see it in this photo. It's got this pale yellow gular patch on the chin, but it's all dark up here. There's no bright orange anywhere. And there's certainly none between the eye and the beak in the lores. It's got a little bit of a kink, but it's a much straighter neck than this bird when it's flying. And it's a thinner neck. It's a little bit less of that really thick, beefy neck of the double-crested cormorant. This is, in fact, a Brandt's cormorant. And the other thing you can totally see that's special about Brandt's cormorant when it's flying is its proportions, its overall proportions, and how I think of this in terms of like balance, how it balances the front half of the bird and the back half of the bird and the wings, it's got a short tail. It's got a stubby little short tail for a cormorant. This one has a longer tail, and it's a subtle distinction, but when you start looking for it, it becomes less subtle. It becomes more obvious as you look for it. Like I'm sure to a person from Mars or whatever, humans would all look the same, right? The difference between them would seem very subtle. They'd look at the people in this room and they'd say, oh yeah, I guess that one's got a little bit of white on the top and that one's got less of anything on the top. And sorry, I keep talking about this. It's not fair. There are many features that you would notice as a person from Mars, but you'd have to work at it and they would seem like subtle distinctions. For the most part, they'd all look the same to you. Same with cormorants, right? But if you start looking for those differences, they become more obvious. Like I'm sure to a cormorant, it's very obvious. Like this long tail, how it's kind of the back half of the bird is almost as, balanced with the front half of the bird. I mean, not quite, but close. But with this bird, it's like, no, it's all front. Like there's the back is much less than the front because of the short tail. Anyway, that's the branch cormorant. And here's one more. The third cormorant that we have around here, the pelagic cormorant. And again, doesn't have the really prominent kink. Actually has an even thinner head and neck, especially the head, like even the branch cormorant. Like the branch cormorant's got a little more of a thickening going on there. Pelagic cormorant, it's almost like a snake, right? That whole head and neck thing is just a continuous, long, thin, snaky thing. And its tail is relatively long compared to a branch cormorant. Like again, look at the balance of like how it, front of the wing, behind the wing. The bird is angled, so it kind of makes it harder, but it's got a longer tail than the branch cormorant. Oh, and the face is all dark, no yellow, no nothing. In breeding plumage, actually a little bright red patch on the face. And actually in the breeding plumage, it gets big white prominent patches on its hips. It's these big white patches back here, which is super helpful because you're spending all year studying these things going, I think that's a branch. Oh, I think that's a pelagic. I think that's a branch. No, every bird seems to like land right in the middle, right? You're like, I don't know what it is. But then in the breeding plumage, all of a sudden it's like, oh, white patches, definitely a pelagic. So you're studying those really hard during that time because I'm trying to commit to memory. What does this bird look like? So that when it loses those white patches in its non-breeding plumage, I can still identify it. Okay, that's it for cormorants. We should take a break. We'll do like 5 minutes and then we'll resume. I encourage you to sample the treats. Homemade zucchini bread, store-bought Valentine's cookies. They're all good. Try one of each or not. But you folks on Zoom, I'm gonna mute the mic for about 5-ish minutes and then we'll come back. Sound good? Yes, no? All right. Little preview of the next break.
John, the cormorant that has about fluffy white.
Are you going to do falcons?
We do have falcons coming up.
Well, I see a dove, it's like a young dove.
Yeah. Their flight characteristics, I think, are very similar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think they probably, I think it's probably a convergent evolution thing. They've kind of evolved in an arms race with each other, falcons and doves. Do they both evolve from parents? No? I know falcons did. I mean, they're all related to some extent, but yeah. But I don't know. This is just me speculating irresponsibly. They both fly fast, and I think that's the look of a fast flying bird. It's like you have that teardrop shape. Like fighter planes. Fighter planes are shaped the same way for the same reason. They got to go fast. And falcons are certainly the fighter planes of the bird world. Okay, I'm going to ring my imaginary bell and resume the meeting. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, ting-a-ling. Sally, Sylvia,
Yes, sir.
Thank you. For about 2 years after I graduated from college, my first real job, I was a substitute teacher in junior high school and high school. So thank you for bringing me back to that for a moment. It felt good. It felt like, oh, I'm back in the classroom. Well, yeah, if I had students like you, it would have been a lot easier back in the day, let me tell you, because they are perfectly capable of ignoring me. Okay, but we're on and we're looking at more birds. Folks in Zoom, can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me? Excellent. All right, glad to hear that I'm being heard. We're going to hide these meeting controls so I can see more of the wonderful birds. Okay, we're on to a new group of birds. I feel like we could do, we could call out in unison. Everybody's going to know this bird, right? 1, 2, 3.
Great.
Great blue heron. That was gratifying too. Yeah, it's a great blue heron. So all the herons and egrets and bitterns, the Ardeidae, I don't know how to pronounce it. All the members of that order. They have this characteristic flight thing where they curl their neck into an S. So when they've got these long necks, right, to go with their long legs, and they use them for, wading and grabbing and doing things like that. But unlike, say, cranes, which also have long legs and long necks, when they fly, they bring the head back and they curve their neck into this S shape. And they don't always do it. Once in a while, they'll fly with their neck sticking out, like especially if they want to look like a big, scary dinosaur. And, but most of the time when they're flying, they curl up like that. And you can see this one is starting to uncurl as it comes in for a landing, but that's basically the look. I mean, they can curl up more tightly when they're flying normally. The other thing that I notice about herons and egrets or daids when they are flying is I've always thought they had a little bit of a downward curve to their wings. Like they seem to spend a lot of time with their wings just curving down a little bit. And this one is doing it a little bit, which is why I like this photo. I'm not sure it's real. I'm not sure it's something that all birds don't do typically when they're flying, but I notice it with these herons and egrets, and it jumps out at me as like this sort of characteristic heron/egret flight style. So look for it and see if you agree when you see those birds out there. There's a little bit of a downward curving wing thing. Let's see. Oh, okay. So here's a great egret coming in for a landing. It's a fun photo. So when you see these egrets fly, they're all white. They're clearly egrets, right? When you see them flying typically, or they're egret-ish. They got the curved neck thing going on when they're in flight. I mean, not now, but when it's flying. And they're all white. So size is very important for distinguishing the different species we have around here. The great egret is very big, basically about as big as a great blue heron. It's a very big egret. Bill color is very useful. It's got a almost all yellow bill on the great egret. And leg color and foot color is important. It's got all black legs and feet. And we got this one, the fun-sized egret, the slightly smaller egret, which is the snowy egret. So instead of an all yellow beak, it's got a black beak with a little yellow stuff in the lores between the eye and the beak. And it's got mostly black legs, but then it's got these bright yellow feet, which are fun. So, comparing to this one, if you see the feet and the beak and the legs, well, you don't even really need to bother with the size, right? Because you see that pattern, it's a snowy egret. You see that pattern, it's a great egret. It can be surprisingly tricky, at least for me, to tell them apart other than that. Like if they're at a distance and I look and I say, okay, is that the big one or the little one as it's flying? And I always feel like it's right smack dab in the middle. So I try and talk myself into it either way. And a really useful thing, if you see one, that is coming towards you, you can make a guess and then see if you were right. And then be honest with yourself, okay, maybe next time I see one in the distance, I'm going to be a little slower to pull the trigger because it turns out I was wrong on this one. Anyway, they're fun. Oh, so this is also fun. So about the same size as a snowy egret, but it's wrong for a snowy egret. It doesn't have the yellow feet. It doesn't have the dark beak with the yellow lores, you know, it's got this kind of two-tone beak. And then this feature, which is visible when it's flying, is actually really helpful. See how it's got these dusky tips to the primaries? A little bit of a black there. I probably have. I mean, to the extent I've been around this bird, I have probably misidentified it as a snowy egret as it flew by. So, oh, it's an egret, it's the little one, it's a snowy egret. It's not. It's a little blue heron. It's a young an immature little blue heron when they're all white, like an egret, except for those little features. And there was one that was hanging out at Lake Los Carneros a few years ago. I'm looking at Eve because I realized as I was saying this that I think that's what it is, but I could be totally misremembering or like conflating two birds in my head. Okay, well, you in Zoom who can consult your field guide, and if I've mistaken some different bird for this, I'm never going to live it down. But I am saying with a certain degree of confidence that's a little blue heron. And we had it at Lake Los Carneros, unless it was a different bird. No, pretty sure it's a little blue heron.
Identification, I can't remember who was like those guys.
Ah, excellent. Okay, good. I feel better now. Except I feel worse that I shared that because I could have just not shared it. I would have been better off. Okay, well, let that be a lesson to all of us. All right, we're on to a new group. I love this photo because you almost never get to see the head that well. You know, it's like, if you could see the head that well, there'd be no problem identifying this bird every time. It's a very cool bird. This, of course, is a turkey vulture. And this one was flying by about 10 feet away, and I was at maximum zoom, just like, yeah. And I got one shot, but I mostly got the bird in the shot, so I liked it. Well, you take 500 photos, maybe one is sort of okay. Here's a more, characteristic view of a turkey vulture in flight. It's got that dihedral, right, where the wings are angled up into a shallow V a little bit. Does that a lot. It's got the sort of lighter flight feathers and then the darker wing linings. It has kind of a rocking motion that they tend to do while they're flying. If you see a turkey vulture in flight, it will rock, a little bit rocking here and there. If you're lucky enough to see a California condor in flight, superficially kind of similar in terms of the overall pattern, doesn't rock. It's just like, straight and stable like a Cessna. They're just huge. And
do they ever come to Carpinteria?
So funny you should ask. Last week I was talking, was it Eve? Was I talking to you about this? Okay, well, Sally? I was talking to Sally. So last week, there was a really windy day. I want to say it was the 8th, which was maybe, is that Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday?
No, it was Thursday.
Yeah. Today is the 15th, so it would have been Thursday. Yeah. So I want to say it was Thursday. I'm pretty sure it was the 8th, which would have been Thursday. It was super windy, right? And I don't think I even went out birding, or I did go out birding somewhere, but I was happy that the wind had died down a little bit, so it wasn't really nasty. Because birding in high winds is not fun usually. Because the bird's all high, right? They're not going to go out there and get blown into a side of a building. They're going to go perch somewhere where it's protected and come out later. But an exception to that rule is birds like California condors, for whom a high wind day is like, woohoo, it's like the express rail pass. They can go wherever they want to go with like no energy expended. They just ride the updrafts off the ridges and they can go, 200 miles without beating a wing. So that in fact is what the condors were apparently doing, because there was a person up on East Camino Cielo, just a little bit west of La Cumbre Peak. And he had a group of 5 condors fly over.
Wow.
And then later he had a group of 3 condors fly over, or maybe it was 3 and then 5. And they're all headed west. They're all going, so he assumed that was 8 condors. And a couple of days, a day or two later, he had told some people about this, like, you got to put that in eBird. So he put it in eBird. So I see this report come up in eBird from a name I don't recognize for 8 California condors along East Camino Cielo. I'm like, oh yeah, you saw turkey vultures is what you saw. No, he saw condors, and he had photos. He had cell phone photos. Like with a cell phone photo, you could read the wing tag on the condor. That's how close he was. So go check it out in eBird. Go search for California condor sightings, and you can see this one that was probably visible from my house if I'd been looking at the right time, but I wasn't. And they kept going, and they're probably hundreds of miles away by now. But that was exciting. So your basic turkey vulture, though. So another bird that looks a lot like a turkey vulture from a distance, if you're not paying close attention, is this bird. And in fact, that's no accident. It is presumably an adaptive mimic. This is a zone-tailed hawk, which we occasionally get in Santa Barbara County. Very rarely, but it does happen. In fact, the last good chaseable sighting of a zone-tailed hawk in Santa Barbara County was during a Carpinteria Birdwatchers outing at the Carpinteria Bluffs, because I remember I cut the meeting short because they got the report like, we're seeing a zone-tailed hawk at Farron Road. And so I said to the meeting, okay, outing over, bye guys. And I ran to my car and drove up there and took this photo.
Wow.
So that is a zone-tailed hawk. And it looks like a turkey vulture because that's what it wants the little things on the ground that it's hunting to think. Oh, it's just a turkey vulture. It's just not interested in me because I'm still alive. And then wham, the zone-tailed hawk grabs it. And then it is in fact turkey vulture food because it has been successfully preyed upon by the zone-tailed hawk. It's a very cool bird. And it does look a lot like a turkey vulture unless you actually look at it. So this is a good reminder of the old truism of birding, which is bird every bird, which is kind of a dumb sounding phrase, but it's true. Bird every bird. You got to look at all the birds in order to pick out the ones that are actually really good from the ones that, you know, are more ordinary. And if you just look quickly and think, oh yeah, turkey vulture. I know my turkey vulture. It's got the dihedral, it's got the dark and the light. It's turkey vulture. No, zone-tailed hawk in this case. More birds of prey that I think in some ways are easier to tell in flight than on the ground. This is an accipiter. It's the adult of this species. We have two species that look very similar. They have basically the same pattern. We got the sharp-shinned and the Coopers. This one has the little tiny head that kind of disappears into the gully of its forward swept wings, and it's got the squared off tail, and it's got a slightly faster wing beat because it's smaller. It is in fact the sharp-shinned hawk. But be careful with your sharp-shinned Cooper's IDs because even experienced birders get them wrong all the time. And the sexual dimorphism contributes to this. I've talked about this before, so apologies if this is old news to you, but it bears repeating. The female sharp-shinned and the male Coopers are practically the same size. Because like all hawks, the males are smaller and the females are bigger. So again, the small version of the Cooper's hawk and the big version of the sharp-shinned hawk are very similar in size. And even experienced hawk watchers in a study that they did at the Marin Headlands misidentified the male Coopers as sharp-shinned a lot of the time. So watch out for that. I'm going to go ahead and try and do this. Because we saved time earlier on the doves thing. So there is this characteristic flight that Cooper's hawks do for courtship. And it's like a display kind of flight. And it's really weird looking. And I've seen it a few times. And the first time I saw it, I had no idea what I was looking at. It's like, what is that bird? Like, it is flying totally unlike any bird I've seen around here. I didn't know what it was. And then later I saw it happen again on a bird I was able to identify and like, it's a Cooper's hawk. They have this display flight that they do. And I've got a couple of videos here that I linked to. Let's see. All right, you in Zoom, wave your hands if this does not work for you, but I'm gonna assume this works. So the upper of those two birds is doing it. And it's like this sort of exaggerated up and down wing beat thing, kind of slower than their normal wing beats. The display flight. And it's not a great video. That's the best one I could find. And there's a second one, but it's not as good as this one, so I'm not going to bother to show it. For bonus points, what bird is singing as the person who's taking this photo? The common species. Common species that we have. Oscars. I don't know how well. I wanted to share that. So if you're out in the field, and I saw this just the other day. I was driving home from somewhere up in Santa Barbara, and I happened to glance out the window, and I saw a Cooper's hawk doing this. And it's so distinctive, like you can even tell driving down the freeway, like, you know, I survived to tell you the story because you could just immediately recognize it. I didn't have to like take my eyes off the road for more than a second to see this happen. And I think it's very fun that they do this. Okay. Another common local raptor. I just threw this in here because we have a fair number of them, although this photo does not show its flight characteristics very well at all. And its flight characteristics are really helpful for identifying this bird. Also not apparent in this photo is the sound it makes, which is also very helpful in identifying this bird, because it is the noisiest hawk. You know, it's a red-shouldered hawk. It's a red-shouldered hawk. And they have this characteristic, like they flap relatively fast and then glide and flap, 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 glide. They're almost like an accipiter in terms of their flight style, but they are a buteo. All right, it's not a hawk talk, so we're going to keep going. Our common local hawk. It is a red-tailed hawk. Just by default, if you see a buteo, it's a red-tailed hawk, right? You'll be right most of the time. This one being bothered by a crow. All right, I'm going to let Tom handle the admission of this person with appropriate vetting, because we know what can happen. We've been here before. Okay, we'll keep going. This is a very cool hawk. We don't see a lot of around here, but we do occasionally see them, especially in the fall, flying through. If you go up to the Cuyama Valley right now, you can see them, a fair number of them. I went up there a couple weeks ago and saw some of these really close. It was really cool. Had a great time. In fact, at one point it's a ferruginous hawk. And at one point I was driving down the road and I said, there's a hawk on the pole, and the telephone pole right by the road. And it was sort of a short pole, the kind of down below the road. So the bird was basically eye level. I just slowed to a stop on this little lonely road, and I rolled down the window and I took my camera and I had to zoom in to get the whole hawk in the frame. It was so cool. I didn't share that picture though, because I wasn't thinking about it when I put this together, but it's really cool. I can't show the hawks in flight without showing the broad-winged hawk. This is the best photo I've ever managed to get of a broad-winged hawk blasting through Santa Barbara County on its migration in the fall. And this is also a super cool bird that I can't not share. This is a golden eagle flying out at Armor Ranch Road, I think this was, out in the Santa Ynez Valley. Definitely a good place to go to see eagles. This is kind of cool. So this is, again, a red-tailed hawk, but the cool thing about this photo is it shows you the different shape of an immature red-tailed hawk. It's just a little bit lankier is the word I've seen. It's a little thinner. It's a little more like its wing feathers are not quite as long, so its wings are not quite as broad, and its tail is just a little bit longer. Gives it a slightly different shape than the adult red-tailed hawk shape that I'm used to seeing. Like we go back and see, there's the adult red-tailed hawk. I mean, partly it's just because it's got its tail closed up. It's, you know, birds of prey have very different looks, very different silhouettes based on what they're doing. Like sometimes they're in a hurry and they're just gliding fast with everything kind of closed up. Other times they're soaring slowly, trying to, you know, present as much surface area to the thermal as possible. Anyway, that's an immature red-tailed hawk. So this is fun. This is a horrible photo that I included because it is sort of representative of the view you're going to get a lot of the time when the bird is backlit and you can't see it very well. But this is fun because it shows you this thing about the emarginated primaries that we've talked about in a previous meeting. So if you look at, say, a red-tailed hawk, again, the default buteo that we see all the time, and you look at the emarginated primaries, the ones that make those fingers at the end of the wing, because they're sort of narrower, the outer part of the feather is narrower, so they do this finger thing. It's got 4 emarginated primaries, and you don't count the first one, which is much shorter. Just look at the other primaries just behind that one. 4. Right? Don't look at the eagle. This one's, don't look at the broad-winged. Look at the ferruginous. So again, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4-ish. Okay. This red tail. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 4 emarginated primaries. But this one in the bad photo has 3 emarginated primaries, which gives it this kind of pointed wing look, this pointed wingtip. This is in fact a Swainson's hawk. And they come through sometimes, especially in the spring. In fact, this was a Swainson's hawk I photographed in the spring up above Toro Ridge, so up by where you guys live. They, for some reason, I've seen them there more than once, maybe even 3 times. Like it's a good place to go in the spring to climb up that trail that goes up to the top of Toro Ridge and just look for hawks because they like to fly along that ridge. I don't know why, but they do. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, they'll fly in big groups. Like Swainson's hawks, famously in their migration, they will congregate in big numbers. If you go down to like, where is it in southern Mexico or like the Yucatan Peninsula, there are these famous hawk watching sites. We go down there, you can see 1,000 Swainson's hawks at one time, and another 1,000 broad-winged hawks. It's just amazing in the fall that they concentrate down there. They just funnel together. Okay, falcons. Someone was asking about, are we going to talk about falcons? There's Eve. Okay, falcons, Eve. We're going to do falcons. Murder parrots, adorable little evolved parrots that kill things. So this is our smallest local falcon. They're quite cute for a murdering parrot. I'm sure there are many sparrows and mice in Carpinteria that would dispute that characterization. They are not cute at all. They are terrifying. But this is the American kestrel. This one I want to say is a male because it's got the reddish tail, kind of hard to see from underneath. It's relatively kind of light and dainty and buoyant for a falcon. Like falcons are evolved to be fast, but kestrels are sort of the lighter end of that spectrum. You know, they're not as fast. They're more light and buoyant, and they hover. They'll hover in place for a long time, looking for a grasshopper or whatever to drop on and grab and eat. They're very cute little falcons, and I think they are cool. This, on the other hand, is a very fast beeline, aggressive murder parrot that's also basically really small. This is a merlin. So telling a merlin from an American kestrel can be kind of, well, I mean, you know, they're both small, they're both falcons, and that part is pretty easy. But then if you're not close enough to see the details of their face pattern and wing pattern and all that stuff, it can actually be kind of tricky. I mean, they're both, you know, pretty similar, but when they fly, you watch them in flight, very different. And they're different because kestrels, as I say, are sort of have this light, buoyant flight. Watch a kestrel in flight and kind of get that in your head, and then watch a merlin in flight, and it's like, you know, it's just going after something. They're always in a hurry to get somewhere, and they are doing it quickly. So I saw a merlin blast over my house like 2 days ago as it was going after some finch or something that was flying through the air. And the finch escaped, but it was a close call, and it was exciting to watch. And a kestrel's not going to do. I mean, a kestrel will catch birds. I've seen the kestrel eating a bird that it caught, but it's not that like high speed rocket, you know, through the air trying to run it down in flight that the merlin is. Okay. Same thing, only bigger. This is a peregrine falcon. And again, it's super fast. It's in a hurry. It's going somewhere. It's probably chasing down a pigeon, and it's going to catch it and eat it. So, peregrines are awesome. And we have some around carp. I haven't seen one this year so far, though. But I was a slacker for most of January because I had a cold. I'm still looking forward to seeing my first peregrine of the year. If you know where one is, let me know. I will go see it. In the salt marsh? Maybe Sunday. I'm going to be out of town Sunday. I can't go with you guys. I'll go another day. Another really cool bird of prey that you can see if you go to Cuyama right now. This is the prairie falcon. I had great views of a prairie falcon up there on this same trip. About 5 minutes after I got that great photo of the ferruginous hawk perched by the side of the road, I got a great look at a prairie falcon just flying around, and ravens were chasing it, and it was just like going after things. I think it was going after horned larks, and it was just super impressive to watch. But again, oh, and in flight, you can see it has these kind of like a little bit like the black-bellied plover. It's got black axillars. It's got like dark wing pits, and actually it extends out into the wing, the dark area. But it's a good way to distinguish it quickly from, say, a peregrine falcon, which it otherwise looks kind of like. And it's lighter in color. If you see the top part of it, it's sort of tan, definitely lighter than a peregrine. But it's a very cool bird. If snowy plovers were my favorite bird, this might be my favorite bird. And if one of these is in front of me and the snowy plovers are 100 miles away, this is going to be my favorite bird. Okay, so perching birds. I don't have a lot of photos of them in flight, but they are worth looking at in flight. This is one of our local kingbirds. And the fact that it is in flight and is showing you its white outer tail feathers is very helpful. Right, which is a feature you can't really see that well when it's perched all the time, but when it flies and it's making a turn and it fans its tail out, it's like it's a Western kingbird because it's got the white outer tail feathers, as opposed to the Cassens, thank you, Cassens kingbird, which can sometimes have sort of pale, outer edges of it, so don't fool yourself. But with the Western kingbird, it's like obviously like very contrasty white against that dark tail. Western kingbird. Okay. So crows versus ravens. So we're going to the bluffs. So I thought I would include this video. Crows can glide, but they rarely soar, right? They're not out there taking advantage of updrafts and thermals to like circle and gain altitude or fly along a cliff without having to beat their wings. Ravens love to soar. So if you see a big black crow/raven and it's soaring, it's a raven. And these two ravens were out at the bluffs soaring together, and it was just the coolest thing.
There's a pair that you can like
Yeah, it could be this pair. I mean, I know they nested on the cliff at the bluffs one year, and I think they nested under the pier at the bluffs one year, or maybe a couple of years. Anyway, I think I linked to this video from the notes for this meeting, so you can watch it longer if you want. It goes on for a while, because I could not take my eyes away from these guys. Yeah.
They do like that.
They'll like roll over and yeah, they are super cool if they do this. Okay. How do I get out of this? Okay. Oh, all right. I've exited it altogether. Let's go back to the presentation. We're almost there. Swallows, worth looking at in the air. Again, you're often going to see them in the air, so check them out and do your best. They look pretty similar to each other, the different swallow species, but if you can see it well enough, like you can tell that this is a barn swallow. It's got like the long forked tail, right? And really long, and the wings are in fact longer and thinner than our other local swallows. So it's very elongated and sort of the elegant turn of swallows. No, but it's late. We're gonna move on. So here's sort of the opposite end of the local swallow spectrum. This is a violet green swallow, and it has basically the shortest tail of our local swallows. So if you look in the Sibley guide, at least, it has these silhouettes of swallows in flight, and it shows like the swallow with its wings close to its body as it's flapping. And with the violet green swallow like this one, the closed up wings actually extend beyond the end of the tail. So again, it's subtle, but if you study a mixed group of swallows, you can actually get to where you can pick out the violet green swallows because their tails are shorter. They have just a little bit of a different sort of flight style. They're almost Swiftian, as swallows have. Do you have any more? Oh, so I wanted a video of cedar waxwings in flight, and I couldn't find a good one. So you're going to get Bohemian waxwings in flight. This is a species I've never seen, but they fly a lot like cedar waxwings, it turns out. And it's a really cool thing about cedar waxwings. They form these tight little flocks that fly sort of, as an integrated flock of a tight little group of birds together. And you can learn to recognize them, not even by the silhouette of the individual birds or the flight style of the individual birds, but by the flight style of the flock as a unit. You can recognize a flock of cedar waxwings flying around here, and they're around here now. You can see them flying, occasionally you'll see them. So when they fly as a flock, they kind of look like this. Kind of hard to see like that. There's like a little group of them, and they're all like tight mass moving around. Okay. We're gonna move on because we're almost there. All right, let's all right, well, I played that game. I can go back to this view again. All right, we're almost there. In fact, I think this is the last. No, this is the second to last. Okay, so I talked about this. The only reason this is here is because I talked about it in the page at carpbirdwatchers.org that talked about this meeting. I said, I'll talk about little brown jobs. So I'm here, I am talking about little brown jobs. So 3 of our most common local little brown jobs, at least at this time of year when we still have the white crowns here, are the house sparrows on the left, and the white crown sparrow on the upper right, and the house finch on the lower right. And this is kind of cool because you've got the yellow variant of the house finch. Sometimes they eat weird food and they get yellow instead of red, but most of the time they're red like this dude. And they do have distinctive flight styles. And the one thing I read about fairly recently that I started looking for, and it's totally true, is that if you have a flock of house sparrows, guys on the left, and they flush and go for cover, they will fly as a group right into the bush. Like they will fly into the center of a bush and just disappear into it. It's just a thing they like to do. And if you watch them, they do it all the time. It's really cool. Whereas, say, a group of house finches, which otherwise superficially, especially if you don't have binoculars on them, look like little brown birds of about that size, they'll come flitting in and stop and alight on the bush. You know, they don't do necessarily the house sparrow thing of diving into the center of the bush. And the white crowned sparrows, I guess, are kind of in between. They're a little bit like, they do dive into a bush. I've seen them do it. But they also look distinctly different than the house sparrows in flight. Yeah, house sparrows in flight, they're kind of small and compact, and they kind of just, you know, they kind of buzz along. And the white crowned sparrows are just a little bigger. They're almost like getting up to being towhee sized. You know, they're a little bit of a big sparrow. And they have different flight style because of that. And the other thing, so when you're seeing them like in the air, so when I have a cold, like I did in January, and I didn't get to go birding as much, I didn't want to lose my eBird streak. So I wanted to keep birding every day. So I would, even if I had a fever, like for 10 minutes, I was going to go in the backyard and I was going to watch birds for those 10 minutes. So I'd go in the backyard and I'd see whatever birds I could see from my backyard. So now you know my secret. If you're looking at my eBird, you know, list and you see all these Mesa Lane backyard, what are these checklists from the Mesa Lane? That's me when I don't feel well. I go out in the backyard. Or sometimes I just go because it's fun. And but you'll see a little brown job flying across the sky, right? And if it's a house sparrow, and I see house sparrows and house finches flying across the sky from my backyard. House sparrows, you know, pretty straight. House finches, right? So you can look for that and you can totally tell them apart from that. I mean, there are other birds that go straight and there are other birds that undulate. So, you know, yeah. So woodpeckers are famously undulators, right? They do that kind of scalloping flight, except Lewis's woodpeckers. Lewis's woodpeckers fly like crows. They go straight. They don't undulate. And also, you know, listen for their flight calls will actually help a lot because it turns out that house finches and house sparrows have different vocalizations. So a lot of times when I'm putting one or the other on my backyard list, it's because they announced who they were by the sound they made. Okay. Oh, this is the very last one. So this was on a pelagic trip. I haven't talked about pelagic trips on this talk, but really for looking at birds in flight, pelagic trips are all about looking at birds in flight. You know, you're seeing birds in flight all the time on a pelagic trip. That's what you're seeing a lot of. And occasionally out in the middle of the ocean, you will see a bird that has no business being there. And they'll be attracted to the boats. You know, they'll be like, oh, can I land on this thing? You know, I'm tired of flying over these waves. I'm looking for something I can land on. So this Western meadowlark circled our boat like 10 times, you know, as we were out there on the pelagic trip. This was a very well photographed Western meadowlark because there were about, you know, 50 people with 600mm lenses going by. Probably the most attention a Western meadowlark has had from a group of expert birders in a long time because it was out over the ocean. So that is it. That's it for the slides. I didn't see it hit the water. I assume it got somewhere.
Land on the boat?
It did not, as far as I recall, land on the boat.
There's been a big flock of Western meadowlarks at the salt marsh. I mean, I would say like at least 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised.
You know, and Western meadowlarks will be deceptive. Like they'll be out there and you won't even know, and then they'll take flight and be like, wow, there's like a whole bunch of them. Yeah, where were they? Okay, well, I didn't really stop for questions, but I also blabbed, incessantly. So we're at 8 o'clock and I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting. Thank you everyone very much for participating. Come out on Saturday. Go to the bluffs. We'll see some birds in flight. We'll have a good time. And thank everybody in Zoom too. I kind of neglected you, but it was great to have you here virtually.
It helps.
Bye.
Bye.